Thanks ever so much, Pam. So good morning, everybody. My name's Alex Mayer. I'm a former MEP and a rural resident, and I'll be your chair for the next 40 minutes or so. So we're moving on to our next session, which is talking about building Britain's future and serving the nation. And I'm really excited because we've got three great speakers lined up. We've got Jeff Smith, who's a Manchester MP and former councillor, and most importantly, he's Shadow Minister for Local Government. And that's a really, really great job because he gets to see every day the difference that Labour councillors and Labour councils are making in power. So whether it's building council homes, whether it's the COVID response, whether it's what we're doing to improve local schools and health services. We're also going to be joined by two Metro mayors, and that's because we had some really, really great successes in the elections in May under Keir Starmer. And also, I would say, with the help of Labour Coast&Country, because we definitely did some dialogue phone banking for the two Metro mayors who were then candidates, but managed to beat the Tories. And what's really good is that now we've got Metro mayors right across the country, not only covering urban areas, but also covering rural and coastal areas. In fact, 20 million people are now represented by Labour Metro mayors. And they've got powers over things like jobs and skills and homes and transport. And we can really see the difference that Labour in power is making. So we've got two of them here today. We've got Dr. Nick Johnson. He is the Metro Mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. He's a doctor and used to be a district councillor, and he represents, as I said, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So that's as well as those two towns, cities. He also represents a lot of flat areas of Fenland and counts John Major, the former Prime Minister, as one of his constituents. And then we've got Dan Norris, who's the Metro Mayor for the West of England. He beat the Tories too, brilliant majority, 40,000 majority now, former child protection officer and used to be an environment minister in the last Labour government. He's also got some urban areas of Bristol and Bath, but also some really, really rural areas too. Some with fantastic names, including Midsummer Norton, which is definitely a real place and not something off ITV where you're expecting some murders. And he also counted Geronimo, the ill-fated alpaca, as one of his constituents. So our special guests are going to speak for around 5 minutes each, and then it's going to be over to you. So please get thinking, get ready to raise those virtual hands in a way that we're used to on Zoom these days. So first of all, it's my great pleasure to introduce Jeff to talk to us for 5 minutes. Jeff, over to you.
Great, thanks, Alex. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Shadow Local Government team, and it's a pleasure to be here with the two fantastic Labour mayors. I thought I'd briefly outline what we're up to in Parliament in the Communities and Local Government brief. And I'm afraid, as you say, I'm from the archetypal Labour big city constituency, so very keen to hear the discussion. You may have heard Keir Starmer say earlier this year, no party can claim to represent the country if it doesn't represent the countryside. Extending that to local coastal communities, our offer to those communities is going to be absolutely vital to everything we do. It's key to building a better country, of course, but it's key to our future electoral success and our hopes of forming a Labour government, because we can't win in power without winning in coast and country seats. So it's really important to us, and we're making a start. I noticed there's a couple of colleagues from Worthing in the conference today. Good results in local elections in May in Worthing. We've got Nick and Dan, so we've got examples of how if we connect with voters, we can win in these communities, some of which have been previous Tory strongholds. And I hear what Pam was saying earlier about our messaging, and we need to be building our programme for those communities, focusing on some of the key issues for those communities. So connectivity, whether that's transport links or broadband connectivity, low rural wages and poverty, affordable housing, access to decent public services. You know, a lot of those are common wherever we live, and Labour needs to speak to the whole country. Because we know that 10 years of austerity has weakened the foundations of rural and coastal communities, as everywhere else, with public service decimated. And we're trying to address those issues now. I think you'll all be aware, I hope, of our review of rural policy. Our colleagues in the DEFRA team have been undertaking, led by Luke Pollard. And the plan is for Daniel will probably talk more about this later, but the plan is for a kind of year-long listening exercise and to produce a rural strategy. And the first findings from the first phase, which the submissions closed in July, but the findings from the first phase due to reported to conference in September. So I can't, I'm afraid, say anything specific at this stage, but watch this space. So my boss, Steve Reed, Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, is very keen on saying you can't level the country up without pushing power down and remaking politics around people, devolving to local communities. He always says, our party's got to win power to give power away. And central to devolution, central to our plans for devolution, we have the Commission on the United Kingdom's Future, which is led by Gordon Brown at Keir's request, looking at the case for economic and political devolution across the UK, looking at the kind of constitutional arrangements we need, how we enable people across all the nations and regions and communities of the UK to share in political power and then economic opportunity and prosperity. And that, while that's the kind of specific policy development is a work in progress, there are some core principles, I think, that underpin it. Fundamentally, we believe that devolution should be a process from the bottom up. We do have, I think, a centralising government set on the opposite course. When the government announced the legislative programme in the Queen's speech earlier this year, you'll probably know that the much anticipated devolution bill was missing. It was supposed to have been a flagship reform, and we're told instead that we're going to have a levelling up white paper and presumably a bill at some point, which will involve some aspects of devolution. But I think it's fair to say that given the lack of substance in lots of the government's levelling up agenda, we're not expecting too much. And the government appear to be proceeding with local government restructure in a pretty fragmented way, I'd say. I've just been dealing in the last week or two with some recent announcements for new structures for Somerset, North Yorkshire and Cumbria that don't appear to have the clear support of local people, and in some cases create quite large, sort of distant unitary authorities. And we're not in principle, we're not opposed in principle to reorganisation, to consolidation and to rationalisation where local structures need it, but if it's to streamline and investment and services, but we think it works best where local people and their elected representatives can decide what structure works best for their local communities. And I think you can maybe see a rationale for why the Tories are shying away from a proper plan for devolution. Labour won 11 of the 13 mayoral elections in May, and during the pandemic we've seen regional mayors, Labour regional mayors, really standing up for their local areas, challenging the government. So devolving power isn't working maybe for the Tories politically. I want to touch just briefly on planning before I finish, because we have the planning bill currently before Parliament, and the impact is going to be, I think, acutely felt in rural and coastal areas. The Campaign to Protect Rural England have agreed with Labour that the bill is going to prioritise developers' needs over local communities' needs, potentially leading to in their words, huge and unnecessary loss of the countryside. So that's something we need to be aware of and tackle in Parliament. The Town and Country Planning Association, amongst others, have said that the changes to permitted development are a disaster for our high streets. And we think the government's plan for the planning system is effectively, we've called it a developer's charter. It will remove powers from local representatives, hand them to Whitehall appointed boards of developers, and do nothing to solve the growing affordable housing crisis that our country faces. It will mean local people no longer having the ability to really have a proper say on developments in their own communities, and that's why we're so concerned about it. There's no doubt we need to build more housing, particularly good quality homes that people can afford to rent and buy. But the problem isn't the planning system. The problem is incentivising developers to use the land that they're already sitting on, rather than waiting for land values to rise. And I'm looking acutely at my watch. I've done my 5 minutes. So I'm going to stop there now. Obviously, looking forward to the conversation in the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much, Jeff. Important points there. I mean, the impact of austerity in many ways has been felt a lot worse in some of our more rural areas, more remote coastal areas as well. If you lose your only bus, that's it. If you lose your only library, that's it. Whereas in more urban areas, there's sometimes a little bit more choice. And then so-called levelling up. Well, we don't want it just going up north, I would say. We also want it going east and west, who are our next two speakers as well. So next, I'm pleased to hand over to Dr. Nick, Metro Mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to everybody. I apologise now if I speak quickly. It's 5 minutes is giving me an opportunity to, as the talk says, talk about serving the nation. So some of this will be very local based, but at the essence of it all, if you take any message away from, I think, what was the success here, the mayoral elections in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, it's because we got the message right, having built up over a period of time, talking about 3 C's. And I make no bones about it. There are 3 C's and they should be the heart of all our policy: compassion, cooperation and community. Now, I have the benefit of being a children's doctor, still do that job on a Tuesday along with my mayoral duties at the moment. And we talked about the benefit of having local candidates. It doesn't have to be a local healthcare worker. It has to be the very key workers, the sort of people who were helping during the kind of COVID pandemic. People like your local librarians, people like your charity workers, the local postie, market traders. We need those sorts of people who stand up for the community, who are seen as being compassionate and are part of, working together, bringing together people from all walks of life, and they're going to be representing the Labour Party. Because that's the sort of thing that got us through the pandemic. Now, when I start introducing over the last 100 days, this idea of what does a Labour and cooperative mayor mean for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, basically the first part of it is trying to make people understand those values. This is what Labour and Cooperative Party do. And it's very important when people say, well, what are the 3 C's again? They start going off and getting it mixed up. It's easy. You start with compassion, then you cooperate, and then you can deliver for a community. And that message really, really resonates across all areas. Now, I make it as I said, get your local candidates in, play to their strengths. Mine's based on health. And it's no secret, I was approached by Daniel Zeichner, the Cambridge City MP, and he did say, have you thought about standing for the mayoral thing? It fell well for me because I've been on the front line, I'm a healthcare worker, and people were trusting the NHS professionals. So out I come, but what I really believe, and when you show compassion, you start interweaving the idea of public health benefits into all the public policy making that we do. It is shocking to me, as I speak to my directors, that they do not know about the Michael Marmot review that has been on the in wide circulations for 10 years. Now, if I can tell anybody here, if you don't know what Michael Marmot has written, go away after this conference and read about it, because that articulates what Labour has to do. Health inequalities are not because you can't get access to your local hospital. We are the party of the NHS, but 70% of health outcomes have got nothing to do with how good your local hospital is or your local GP. It's about the quality of your housing, do you have access to education, and what is your transport? People suffered through COVID, and the most people who suffered the most were those who had the greatest health inequalities because of obesity, because they don't have access to open spaces. These are the things that change people's lives. And this, with compassion, is where, as a mayor or as a local district councillor, as a county councillor, we can make a change. And that message, it doesn't traditionally resonate in our areas that we're talking about, the rural areas, but it's what the rural areas want to hear. I can actually tell you that. So we have the benefit. There is an all-party parliamentary group. We have Debbie Abrahams, an MP for Saddleworth. She's actually the chair of that. They already say, put health at the heart of every decision. My organisation, the Combined Authority, we have a 20 recommendations to put health at the heart of every decision. And you know what? And hopefully this will resonate particularly for those in the rural communities. When you start putting public health benefits at the heart of decision making, it improves the environment. So I'm very lucky that I've had a recommendation, an independent review done by Baroness Brown for our organisation, 31 recommendations accepted across the board. We had to push it. There was pushback from the Conservative members of the board. That's particularly in areas like Fenland, East Cambridgeshire and those districts. But we're on board, and we're now really pushing the net carbon zero, targets, and we're making a real play of it. We're not letting the Liberal Democrats take that from us. We are the party for the Green Deal. We are the party to make the changes, because again, if we can improve the environment, we will improve public health. So in summary, what have I done over 100 years? I prioritize, 100 years, I wish, 100 days. I've already made a big push about pushing bus franchising, learning from the Manchester example, and had benefit with speaking with Andy Burnham. That's really going to make a real difference by improving bus services, making sure they're zero emission, by the way. And then that really, was a starting point, interconnecting the communities. But in essence, I'm sorry to speak so fast because that's what I tend to do when I'm excited and I've got a short opportunity. Go back to what I said at the time. If you can, as a Labour Party candidate, present, the mission of the local Labour Party, indeed the National Labour Party, get our National Labour Party to really believe, as just saying there from Jeff, about the benefits of devolution, the idea that local candidates, they are the ones that show that they care. We are the ones that are showing that we're different to what's gone before. Compassion, cooperation, and then the community comes with you. It's in 3 C's, and it's what I say all the time.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Nick, for that, and really good to hear particularly about the environmental policies and review that you're leading. Good to hear about your 3 C's as well. I have to say, anyone who knows me I think my 3 C's have always been campaign, 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 which is so important if we're going to get Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and make sure that all these Labour Metro mayors get real backing from government as well. So now I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker, Metro Mayor for the West of England, over to Dan Norris.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex, and it's really lovely to meet you all. First of all, can I thank Labour Coast and Country for the brilliant work that you do. It's very important. This is another example, today's event, of what you're doing, bringing us together to share important ideas to make sure that we win in the future. Now, Nick fraudulently said 100 years. It does feel like 100 years, doesn't it, Nick? But actually, it's not that. It's something like 120 days. But they've been very important 120 days. And I think Nick's result and my result have particularly scared the Tories, because I think it's making them challenge and question now their red wall strategy, because as they push so-called levelling up, sort of north-south rather than east-west, they are making themselves vulnerable. So I think we have to ram that home and take advantage of that. Yes, local candidates do make a difference, but it's not the end-all and be-all. It's a good plus, and it does make a difference, but it doesn't mean that a really good candidate can't get through even if they're not local. So we mustn't be too concerned about that, I don't think. But what we do need to do, I think, is think about the language we use. I think our communications have got to be very clear, very concise, very thought through, and the whole tone of our campaigning materials, wherever we are, rural or not, or coast or not, have to be based on speaking for the voters and not about ourselves. I think we've spent an indulgence, frankly, in the last 10 years, looking at what we do, what we care about, and actually it's about what the electorate care about. And if we talk about that, we win, as Nick and I are good examples of that. So look, let me tell you a little bit about what's been going on in the west of England in the last 115 days or whatever it is. Firstly, I think we need to do what we all need to do, what we're now doing in the west of England, which is taking the Tories on where they're making errors and mistakes. And what's happening is that you'll probably be aware with buses, the Tories have suddenly made these 2/3 bus cuts in funding, because the money they were providing for pandemic buses to run has been suddenly sort of taken away off a cliff edge. That's because the government are assuming that buses are running at 80% capacity at this point. Actually, it's nearer 60%. And so there's a shortfall, and bus companies are choosing to obviously cut services rather than make a loss. And that's something that is really tricky in some ways, but a great opportunity too. What we're finding here in the west of England, where we have obviously a Metro Mayor, and in other parts of the country where we have Metro Mayors, is that some Tory MPs are getting up petitions complaining about the bus cuts. Now, it's pretty hypocritical from them, because it's their government that is cutting the money. But what I'd say to you is we need to be quite assertive and strong on that. And so what we do is we take the fight to the Tories on that. And what I've done is I have written to the Minister for the government who's responsible for buses, and I've got Tory MPs to sign up to complain about the lack of funding along with the other parties. So I've got Lib Dems and of course all Labour in Bristol as well, and we have got that going. So we're taking the fight to the Tories and making it so that the Tory MPs have to go against their government, and I think that's really important, a very important strategy for us to use our new power to get the Tories divided on their policies. We've also secured £250 million for broadband, which is very, very important. Rural bus services are very poor in the west of England, particularly. They're not great elsewhere, but they're particularly poor in the rural communities. And so I think connectivity, whether that's public transport connectivity or broadband connectivity, is key. So we're putting an emphasis on those areas that have the poorest bus services and other public transport services to get the priority in the monies for the rural broadband rollout. So that's a key thing. We've also been able to secure £500 million for buses over the next 5 years and other public transport, with the possibility of getting another 400 million. That's really important. But what is quite interesting is that the government have said and set criteria that say it has to be focused on urban areas and the areas immediately outside, not the rural areas. So again, an opportunity to go at the Tories and point out that they're not inclusive, they're not for everybody, and hopefully lever in some more money there. And the other thing that I'm doing, because I'm aware my 5 minutes must be coming up, is that we have we're just about to launch our Green Recovery Fund, which is about 20 million. It needs to be a lot more than that, frankly, but it's focusing on things like retrofitting of homes. So they're obviously cheap to run, environmentally friendly. But the thing I want to just conclude on, if I may, is to say that what we as a party have to show, and for our country, and I believe this will be popular across the nation, is show moral leadership when it comes to the climate change. Historically, the UK has produced the second highest CO2 emissions of any country in the history of the planet. And we cannot ask China or India or Brazil or these other countries not to have their industrial revolutions and not to do it in a green way, or to do it in a green way, unless we've got our house in order. And we haven't got our house in order. So I want our country to not just be the first country that had a major country to have an industrial revolution. I want our country to be the first major country that's net zero very, very quickly. And I think we will get an awful lot of support if we make that our ambition and we work really hard for it. In our region, we have a net zero target of 2030, just 9 years away. It's very ambitious, but it has huge support, and it partly accounts for the election result I got. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much, Dan. So buses, broadband and moral leadership there. So now it's very much over to you. So I'm hoping that you've all been thinking hard about your questions, and I'm about to see a sea of blue hands in the participants area. So who has got some questions for our panelists? I know what this is like. You'll all have your questions at the end, but I want some questions at the beginning. I'm beginning to see a few indications. I need some women as well, by the way. So I can see Pat and I can see Jonathan. Come on, there must be a woman who wants to ask a question as well. No, you're all feeling shy today. Okay, we will start with Pat and Jonathan. So Pat, I think you've been unmuted.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so I'd like to know what kind of think about the important role that town and parish councils have in local democracy, and what their ideas are on how Labour might strengthen them.
Fantastic, a nice, concise question as well there. Jonathan?
Alex talked about at the start that there's 20 million people who've got Labour Metro mayors now, including a lot of people in where I'm from, North East Somerset, and in where Nick is the mayor, that probably have never had a Labour representative before, certainly not at that kind of level. How much do you think, I apologise for a very leading question, how much do you think having a Labour representative will make it easier for those people to vote Labour in other elections in the future? Do you think this is like the first step to kind of making Labour gains, or what?
Very good, and we'll take Neil as well, so we do them in threes. Neil from South Norfolk.
Yeah, I was struck by Dan's comment on net zero playing well, and I think that's something that that we do need to think about quite carefully, the politics of that. I just wonder, 2030 sounds great and very ambitious, and there's the sort of headline level on how it plays, but there's some pretty thorny, tricky issues underlying that to do with meat consumption and land use and dietary change. And I just wonder whether he's got any comments on whether people are beginning to engage in that net zero thing at a more sophisticated level on some of the more thorny, intractable dilemmas that all political parties will face about how you get there 2030 or 2040 or 2050.
Brilliant. Right, 3 great questions. We'll do this round in the order of Dan, Nick, Jeff. So Dan, over to you first.
Okay, Pat. Pat's question was so concise I missed it. So can you repeat it, please?
It's the role of parish councils and town councils.
So what do you think about the important role of town and parish councils in local democracy, and what are your ideas on how Labour might strengthen them?
Okay. Thank you for that, Pat. Well, look, clearly they're important. They're important in the sense of the obvious way, but they're important as a platform for Labour. We only ever build success, in my view, from the ground up. I think we have to look at our local government base and our town council base and our parish council base and get success there. And that's all the things we've been discussing. And you know, I'm with Alex Mayer on this. It's campaign, because there is no substitute for actually getting out on the doorsteps or using the other forms of communication to persuade people. Because at the end of the day, what I think we all have to do, and I'm not sure we've been good as a party at doing this all the time. We've had moments when we've been better than anybody in the world, but it seems to me what you've got to do is get out of our political heads, because we're by definition quite a weird bunch of people, just so you know, in case that's a surprise to you. And the ordinary people out there, the regular people, are actually kind of looking at us, sometimes trying to work out what we're about. So I think we show that we get them by communicating really effectively with them and working hard and being seen to do that. Because I think people don't have time. Regular people are considering elder care, childcare, worries about their jobs, redundancy, all the usual things, paying bills. So what we have to do is show that we care about them by our activities, because they won't have time to get into philosophical arguments and debates like we do. So we have to get out of our own heads and into theirs. I think in terms of the next question, Jonathan, does it make a difference if we have a Labour representative? Too right, it does. Once people have got into the habit of voting Labour, they're much more likely to vote Labour again, of course. And that's a key reason why we need to win where we haven't won for a while. Now, in my region, it's quite an exciting contest because, as Jonathan's written an article about, we won Wansdyke when I was the Labour MP in North East Somerset, which is part of the West of England that I'm now the mayor for. And Jacob Rees-Mogg was my successor because there were boundary changes and he took over. But what Jonathan has worked out is that in order to have a Labour government, we have to win every seat up to Jacob Rees-Mogg's, basically, in terms of marginality. So I can't think of a better incentive for a Labour government than to get rid of Jacob Rees-Mogg in the process and to have our Portillo moment, if you like. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think, John, you know, the way we do it is we win. And as you know, the Tories are consternated and frightened by the result here. They're scratching their heads because it isn't going to their game plan anymore. And I think we now have to, you know, turn the vice a bit and make it more Labour than ever. And then I think, what was Neil's question about net zero? Yeah, Neil, you're right. It is fraught with some problems because if you're very ambitious, you run the risk of not achieving your objective, of course. But I think it's very clear to me we have to be ambitious because I actually think the politicians are behind the public on this, certainly in my area. So it's interesting because we have to kind of get our house in order a bit on the environment, I think. I think, you know, we're not completely at one voice on the environment, I have to be frank. Some of our representatives, I think, need to think and move forward. I don't think it's reasonable for the Labour Party to ask everybody else to change and not to change itself. And I think we do need to make some changes, if I'm frank. And I think that's partly about climate change and showing the moral leadership that I talked about, because I do feel that in uncertain times, which we certainly had with the pandemic, and all the other horrors before of austerity and the other challenges over the last 11 years since we've had a Tory government, what I do think is that people are looking for an integrity, a kind of honesty and a sincerity. And I think that's where you get it is better than anywhere else, is on the environment, because it's clearly a cause that impacts on everybody equally. You know, if the planet struggles, we all struggle, rich, poor, old, young, whatever. We're all challenged by that. And I can't think of any better socialist cause than to fight for the environment when it's so challenging at the moment with an obvious climate emergency.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Thanks, Dan. And I'm sure we need a Labour Coast and Country campaign day in North East Somerset to help unseat Jacob Rees-Mogg. Right, over to Nick next, please.
Thank you. As Dan said, 3 excellent questions. I'll take them in the order. Pat actually asked the question in the chat room, and I did reply, and I'm glad it's been reiterated for the benefit of the whole conference. I actually think it hits the nail on the head. Parish and town councils, that's where, if you really want to start bottom up, often parish and town councils don't have enough members on them. You can have options where you can become co-opted onto a local parish without even going through an election. What it goes back to, I said, it goes back to that sense of anybody puts themselves into public office, they have to be genuine and they have to be seen to care. If you're willing to sit on a Monday evening hearing about issues around hedges hanging over a pavement or inevitably parking in your local parish, at least you're one of the people that stands up. Now, we can do it under the sort of umbrella of party politics or whatever, but I am well aware that in town councils, sometimes parish councils, who actually appear overtly political, can be almost a negative. But even without that, I think we should be proud to be able to stand there with Labour colours, because I think there's opportunities to get involved. Once you sort of level up, I started getting involved in parish councils long before I became a district councillor. So yes, lots of focus on parish and town councils. Every CLP should be looking for opportunities when anybody sort of retires, stands down, get a member in, call the election, make sure that, and even on a very local, that will cost money sometimes, and people don't, the local groups will say, oh, it costs money to run a parish council election, a town council election. Rubbish. We've got to get the message out that the people who have socialist principles want to stand in parish councils and town councils. And actually what starts to happen, they don't even say they're going to call elections, they'll just co-opt you and accept they've got one of those damn socialists on the parish council. It starts with that kind of way of doing it. So yes, start at the bottom. That's real kind of building it up from the bottom. Then, in some ways, that's the best way to do it. But if you do then have this situation as Dan and myself as the sort of Labour mayors, I absolutely love the fact that I am walking into Wisbech and causing consternation with Wisbech Town Council and indeed the local Fenland District Councils. Then they can't accuse me of Labour never seems to care about the rural poverty of Fenland in Cambridgeshire. I've made no bones about it, and I have to be careful because the MP for Cambridge is listening. But, in terms of the genuine, how I'm going to be talking about the devolution pot that's come to the Mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, I target the time always why we need to be thinking about the very areas that have never voted Labour, actually have Steve Barclay, who currently sits in the Treasury, as their local MP, but they are still in Wisbech, some of the areas, some of the most impoverished areas of the whole of the United Kingdom. But they still seem to think they can blame a Labour government and Tony Blair. They can't do it when they've got a Labour mayor who comes in and says, I'm worried about your local museum. I'm going to improve the transport networks in Wisbech and March. So, yes, we are going to use that opportunity, and I'm particularly for North East Cambridgeshire and indeed Peterborough constituency. I will not forget my sound base in Cambridgeshire City, Daniel. I've always promised that, and indeed I'll work with South East Chams as well, Alex. But yes, it makes it easier. And then finally, the question about climate change. I think we all individually, different constituencies will have different challenges. What has been shocking for me in Cambridgeshire to find out that per head of population, it is quite astonishing to find out that the kind of CO2 emissions per head in Cambridgeshire are 25% higher than the national average. Now, I'm going to say, you're all going to sit there. I didn't know that Cambridgeshire had smoking stacks like Teesside or something. It doesn't. But in the Fenlands, it has peat. And peat decomposes and gives off a lot of CO2. So how do I, as a Labour mayor, say I want to push for carbon net zero? I have to be able to work with particularly the farmers. When you start talking about the only way to reduce CO2 emissions from degrading peat is to actually wet the areas, it's very hard to suddenly say we're going to flood the fens and keep the farmers on site unless you do it together. So compassion, you care about your local community, show that you care from the parish councils, town councils, district councils, then you cooperate, and that's where it's going to be very important. Find the socialist voices that are in the farming community for myself, and they are there. Not all farmers are massive landowners. Some are tenant farmers, and they care desperately about the environment, and they want to help their politicians of all colours come up with the answers. As I say, in Cambridgeshire, the particular challenges around peat degradation and what we need to do about kind of wetting those areas. And as I say, you do the compassion, you look like you care, you cooperate with the important partners of your local community, and then you've got it. You're delivering for the community. Goes back to 3 C's.
Thank you, Nick. And of course, as soon as you're a town councillor or a parish councillor, you've got that magic word councillor. That makes you sound like you've been there forever. Incumbency matters, a really fantastic campaigning tool. We're going to go to Jeff in a moment, but please, we're going to have another round of questions. So think about your questions and start putting up your hands now. So we're ready for the next lot. So now over to Jeff, please.
Thanks, Alex. And that little word councillor at the start makes you a local leader. And actually, I think the pandemic has shown us the importance of local leadership. And at a time when we were, you know, isolated very often, the communities were kind of fragmented, I think what the pandemic showed, particularly in the early stages, was the importance of parish and town councils for bringing their communities together. There's absolutely hundreds of examples of really great work, you know, coordinating food banks, local street WhatsApp groups, kind of volunteer groups, donations, mutual aid, all those kinds of things that brought communities together in support of each other at the time. You know, helping vulnerable residents, helping at-risk residents, and they, you know, they're best organised on that kind of level, on that kind of community level. So that's actually a really impressive report by the National Association of Local Councils that brings together loads of examples of best practice from town and parish councils across the country. And it kind of shone a light, I think, on the value of town and parish councils and the work they do in local communities. So absolutely, we never say, when I'm talking with Steve in our team, we don't talk about kind of, there's no kind of one ideal set of organisation for local government, but absolutely local town and parish councils are valuable, important, and need value and need resourcing. On the issue of metro mayors and elections, I suppose I'd reflect on 2 examples. So I spent lots of time in Hartlepool for the by-election there, and I lost count of the number of times that people said to me, I always used to vote Labour, and I didn't vote Labour last time, and I'm not sure now. And those people, you know, they were in the habit of voting Labour year in, year out. They were traditional Labour voters, and they lost the habit, and now they're looking at some other options. They weren't going to automatically come back to Labour, and that's a danger if we lose our voters. But and unfortunately, of course, in that election, people looked at other options. I do think, though, that they were willing to look at Labour now, and they weren't at the last election in 2019 and before that, but they are open now. But they've got out of that habit, which is a problem for us in some places. But it's also, and this is the second example, it's also an opportunity. And the other example I'd reflect on is Andy Burnham's election in my local area in Greater Manchester. So we have, you know, we have a fair few Tory areas in Stockport and Trafford and Bolton and elsewhere. Andy won the popular vote in every single ward in Greater Manchester, which is a remarkable achievement. But it does show you that there are people out there who will vote Labour, and who did so for Andy in the mayoral elections, and we can focus on those people, as you said, Alex, campaign, find out where they are, and get them out to vote Labour in future local elections. And finally, on net zero, it's a tricky one, and it will mean difficult decisions. And we, you know, people will need to change lifestyles. And I suppose I have given up eating 4-legged animals. I've given up eating meat other than chicken. So, and I'm certainly not the only one. Lots of people are kind of changing their lifestyles, and meat eating and that kind of change of lifestyle will impact on rural communities, and we need, I guess, to give alternative economic opportunity to people who might be affected. Now, I don't have the answer to that. I'm hoping that our rural review might come up with some potential economic opportunities for people who are being hit. But there's no doubt that we will face difficult decisions, and we have to make difficult decisions because it is the single biggest challenge we face, and we can't afford, as Dan and Nick were saying, not to address those issues. So I've spoken for too long already. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much, Jeff. Right, back to you again. Hope you've got some burning questions for me. Or non-burning questions, any questions at all, really? Otherwise, I'll be forced to make some up. Well, while you think about it, excellent. Paul Richards, Suffolk Coastal.
Hi there. Yes, thank you very much. My biggest concern actually is that in this part of deepest Tory Suffolk, there is a little bit of a drift away from the Tories, but it's very hard for us to capture it. It's going to the Greens, and it's going to the Greens because they can identify a very simple and straightforward message for us here, that they're opposed to Sizewell C. And that is sweeping up all the Green votes, all the small g Green votes, and a lot of Labour votes as well, because in spite of the fact that we in this constituency are solidly opposed to Sizewell C, the Labour Party nationally and even at county level is not. And that's a real problem, and it's going to be very hard to win those Green voters back to Labour, even though they probably won't go back to the Tories.
Thanks, Paul. David Whittaker, please.
Bear with me, just let me unmute. Hello, my name's David Whittaker. I'm from Morecambe and Lunesdale CLP, and from sunny Morecambe, which is a wonderful seaside and coastal town. We've got the Eden project coming, which a lot of people are looking forward to. I worry about gentrification as a result of that. A lot of poorer people who rent might be priced out of their properties. But my question is a burning issue really in regard to seaside towns and rural areas, and it's an issue that's been neglected, certainly by my council. I can't get any further with it, and it's certainly not being addressed by government, and it's the ongoing issue of fly tipping on back streets. It's an issue I have to deal with on a daily basis as a councillor, and it's just getting horrendous. It's getting worse. So I just want to know what future Labour manifesto commitments, if we're going to come into government, how are we going to address that issue? It's just horrendous. I'm always taking photographs, reporting it. So I would just like any ideas, please. It's an issue that impacts on a lot of the coastal towns which used to be vibrant. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Next up, Councillor Grant Johnson, finalist, Young Councillor of the Year, I believe.
Thank you for that, Alex. I'm sure you and Dan are probably sick of the sight of me at the moment. I've just got a simple question. Our rural areas can be very difficult to find candidates in. So what do you think we can do if we want to win but haven't got the candidates to stand?
Excellent. And we'll take Councillor Helen Silman as well, please.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Yes, I'm glad to hear some of the comments about the challenge of reaching a net zero target. There's one in Worthing Borough Council too for the council itself, its operations and buildings. My particular concern at the moment is I'm considering doing something in the community information before COP26. I think this is a good opportunity for us to remind people, because we're in opposition, that we are here and we have views about these things and we have policies as well. We may well take control next year. We're only 3 short of overall control and 1 short of no absolute control. So this is very, very pressing for us in the Labour opposition group. And I went to a meeting 2 days ago on the decarbonisation of the public sector, and people talked a lot about whether to incentivise change in lifestyle or to punish failure to change lifestyle. And I'd really like to hear your comments on how you would approach those 2 aspects. Thank you.
Okay, and I see Hugh's got his hand up too, so we'll let him ask the question.
Thank you. Hugh Lloyd, a Labour Coast and Country, but also a member of the CIRA Executive. It's a very quick question, and it touches on points that Helen had made and the sort of low carbon interaction. And I think it's along the lines of coast and country areas cannot be responsible and shouldn't be made responsible for sorting out the emissions of urban areas. But unfortunately, that's a lot of what Labour policy tends to do. And until we get a better sense of we're all paying our part and a fair return for the impacts of those things. I mean, I love a word in Tyburn and I'm quite happy to see them at sea, but we should recognise that they have impacts, and we should be better at recognising what that trade-off is about. Thank you.
Thanks, Huel. Right, we'll be answering these ones in the order of Nick, Jeff, Dan. I'm going to add in one for our 2 new Metro mayors as well, because I want to know, over your last 100 odd days, what's the best or the most interesting place that you visited as Metro mayor? So, Nick, over to you.
Right, gosh, so many questions, and I don't necessarily know that I've got immediate answers. I mean, Paul made a comment there about Sizewell, which I know about from a sort of at a distance, but I can recognise there would be a challenge there in terms of trying to get a narrative if it goes against what at a sort of a county or a national level Labour Party policy is. I just don't have an answer to that one. That's just difficult, but stick to your guns in terms of your policies, and hopefully that will win through. In regard to the comments about Morecambe and fly tipping on the streets there, lovely town, Morecambe. I like the Eric Morecambe statue, and I've been there a couple of times. We have fly tipping in Cambridgeshire, and a lot of it's been initially was because of issues around closure or restricted access to the to the kind of the district council, county council recycling centres. I mean, it's an ongoing problem, but certainly has worsened. I know that different councils will approach it in different ways. If you make it easier for things to be able to recycled and to take into a dump, then it's less likely to happen. Aggressive work with the Police and Crime Commissioner to kind of target that as a resource that, you know, and highlighting particular hotspots. That would be stuff that I would do at a local level in terms of the mayoral election. But actually on a campaigning strategy, I know particularly it's the one that comes up in Peterborough City about urban fly tipping, and one that the Labour group has particularly targeted on many occasions. I think it's a good resource, and it's a good thing to get behind and to be seen to be vocal. But obviously, once into the position, the how you deal with it, because it is a real challenge where people who are just determined to take rubbish away and then dump it without paying the appropriate fees. They're doing it from a company point of view, or indeed on an individual way. That just means very strict policing and working with the Police and Crime Commissioner. As for the whole thing about going through in terms of campaign, as I said, I've always kind of tried to use those 3 C's as a basis for how to kind of justify why we need to develop policy. I haven't highlighted it so much on this talk because it's often we've talked about the climate, which is in this area, I guess, of the 4C. But put it into the concept of people that understand that, you know, the importance of an active lifestyle, and trying to encourage people through improved kind of access to cycle routes and other kind of, I guess they are sort of incentives, improving kind of cycle parking in areas where there isn't any within workplaces, working with companies to try and encourage them the cycle to work route. That's a starting point, but just a beginning. Improvement of the actual environment, where, you know, working with developers to try and improve the access to green spaces and not kind of massive housing development. I could just go on and on and on, but I know what the basis is that as an organisation, our combined authority has the benefit of oversight from an independent climate commission, and I'm just expecting to be whipped by them over the next 4 years as to how I'm failing to deliver in driving down. But it's a policy that I want to work towards, you know, making sure that the anything that we've done is, you know, even running our meetings, trying to limit the amount of carbon that is used and trying to get people to meet together, and any sort of the council fleet, either the county council, district council, they're moved to zero emission electric style refuse collection. I just could go on and on, but I'm in danger of just, for one to say, waffling, but I do think we need to focus on it, but entwine that with the idea of public health benefits, and I think it's something that really works, and campaign hard against fly tipping, be seen to be caring, goes back to it, compassionate, you cooperate with whoever you need to do, your other councillors, your local businesses, community will appreciate it, we'll get re-elected.
Thanks, Nick. Over to Jeff, please.
Thanks, Alex. On the first question, it's difficult because there will always be issues where our national policy conflict with a particular local issue, and there's not an easy way around that other than to be seen to be representing your own local community and doing what you can and standing up for those people. But it's something that we can't adjust our national policy on the basis of an individual issue. It will have impacts elsewhere. I know that some of my colleagues on the northwest coast and Warrington and places like that would be very perturbed if we started to change our nuclear policy. So yeah, I mean, I think all you can do in those situations is represent your local community. There's a sort of wider issue about the Greens. I do think we need to be very aware of the Greens as a potential rival actually in years to come, because I think I think they're going to be the coming force in both rural and urban communities. I see it in my local community in Manchester, where they're making ground, and certainly in some rural and coastal communities actually. And I just think, as I said earlier, the climate crisis is our biggest challenge, and we can't be seen to be abdicating our responsibilities on that. And I think, if we do the right thing, which is meeting that challenge, then we can beat them at the polls as well. On the issue of candidates for rural areas, it's not something I'm an expert on. I mean, all we can do with our candidates is make sure they're valued, make sure they're well trained. So there's an issue there about mentoring and training for potential candidates, and maybe pairing between constituencies or different areas, and just trying to bring through people in that way. But there's no easy solution. It's very often being a local councillor is a thankless task, and you need people who are dedicated, and we need to value our local councillors and value the people on them. On the issue of flights, I mean, as Nick said, we've got some questions here that are quite intractable issues, and there are no easy answers. I think actually, I'm not sure. I think our colleagues asking about manifesto policies. I'm not sure the policies are necessarily what we need to change. It's the resourcing. We need to make sure that we resource both policing of illegal flight tipping, but also making sure that we have the resources in place for people to be able to use recycling and access it easily. So there is, I think somebody referred to culture change in the chat, and I think that's what we need to be focused on as well. So it's about making a culture change from people who are committing these offences, but then also clamping down and resourcing the clamping down on those offences. And finally, net zero, the stick or carrot. I think it has to be a bit of both. I mean, I've always believed that carrot, if you like, is the best way of persuading people to do the right thing. But we are up against deadlines and crisis, and we are in a crisis. So I think it has to be a bit of both.
Thanks, Jeff. Over to Dan now, please.
Thanks very much, Alec. Well, I've got a question, first of all, for Nick. What's that hairstyle you've got called, Nick? It looks like you've survived the electric chair. It's an early morning rise on a Saturday. Okay,
it's too much product and a bit of a late night style. Is that? But
that's fine, Nick. No, I thought it was a good way of making the party fun. So well done, good initiative. Maybe it answers some of the questions we've got. And it's good to see Nia again, one of my MP colleagues. So hello, Nia. I haven't seen you in a while, so hello. Look, let's go through the questions very quickly in order. Paul's question. The sizable C thing, big issue, I understand that, but I think you have to kind of take it square on, as Jeff is saying quite rightly in his answers, his good answers. It seems to me that you can't duck the reality that that's changed. I was very much against nuclear power. The world's moved on. We now recognise it as, oddly enough, a green source of energy, better than any alternatives given climate change and the climate emergency. So we have to get our head around that. But what we should be thinking about is ways that we can make sure that generators like Sizewell C contribute something towards biodiversity improvement in the area or something like that. And perhaps we as a national party can think about how we put obligations on nuclear power stations or whatever it might be to perhaps make the local sizable sea area a pollinator capital or something like that, something that puts something green in if there's a contentious issue about it being there in the first place. David's point about fly tipping, well, I agree with Jeff completely. That's about resources. The problem we've got with fly tipping is because many of our refuse places and recycling places aren't open the hours people want to use them, and haven't got sufficient capacity, and it takes ages to go there, and so people and it costs money as well in some instances. So we have to change that. If we want people to do the right thing, we've got to make it easy for them to do that. Getting candidates, I think that was Grant's question. Grant, I think you've got to make it fun, which I think younger members are pretty good at working that out. And I remember when I first joined the party, I was very impressed by many of the celebrities and bands and artists and things like that. And I'd like to see more of that again, because I do think that's what motivates people at the early stages of their life to get involved in politics. And also we need to, as a party, recognise that, actually, fun isn't a bad thing. We get very serious in the Labour Party. We need to have a laugh sometimes. And I remember being in the chamber with the Lib Dems, and they were being very earnest in the chamber, as they always are, because they never think anyone takes them seriously, because no one really does. And I said in my intervention as an MP that I thought that they could be missing out on the joke of the century, because they weren't able to laugh at themselves. And they've always been very offended about that. But, the truth is, you've got to make politics fun as well as serious. I mean, it's a serious business, but, we're human beings. We need to have a light side to it. Helen's question about incentivize or punish. Well, I think you should always try and incentivize, because I think you get better results by and large on that. And I think it's important to do that, not least because we want to make it easy for people to do the right thing, basically, is what we're aiming at. And as Huel know, when I was a minister in DEFRA and he was a senior civil servant there, that was our objective, to make it easy for people to do the right thing in terms of modifying their behaviour. But, and here's the rub, you do have to say that if changes don't happen by a certain timescale, we will have to do some difficult things, like charge for parking or whatever it might be. So it's a bit of both, of course, which is a pretty obvious answer in some respects. Huel, typically you have asked the most difficult question of all. I don't know the answer to that, but if the price of doing things means that it's disproportionately on coast and rural areas, then we need to be thinking about that hard. So we need to talk about that again, so I have a better understanding of that and can make sure I incorporate that. All I can say is that in my very large region, there's a huge diversity of communities, as many of you will be aware, from very urban Bristol to places like Bath and amazing market towns and the most rural of areas. And I see it that although there are unique differences, there's a lot of similarities. And the similarities is that we all want to deal with climate change. And we've got to find out how each and every community can play its part in achieving that in whatever unique way that means. And then Alex, best place I visited, Alex, the Labour Party Victory Party in the west of England last Saturday, where we were all able to see each other for the first time. Many of us hadn't met each other, only through Zoom, and it was lovely to see people. Grant was there, Councillor Grant, and he's much taller than you'd think on his Zoom performance. He's a tall guy. So there you are. That's my favourite place. I've rattled on. Lovely to talk to you all. I hope that helps. And sorry for the personal comment, Nick.
Hey, as long as you don't comment about these comedy glasses I had to find today. Somebody said I look like Dennis Nielsen, and these are not my regular glasses.
Right, thank you everyone. So a big thank you to our two successful mayors, Dan Norris and Nick Johnson. Thank you to Jeff Smith MP for talking to us. Thank you ever so much to everyone who asked such good questions. We're now moving to a coffee break, and